Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, and frenemies. Brother Rob Wilson here. Due to recent questions asked on videos I have done, and I'm going to make this special video that has to do with the biblical explanation of trauma bonding. Okay, sometimes I use the expression you're trauma bonded, or no, that's not love that's being activated in you, it's a trauma bond. And this is not to be mistaken with a soul tie. The charismatic or hyper charismatic version of soul ties, I do not support. There is no ritual, there is no spiritual warfare necessary to break a trauma bond, or what some people have called Stockholm syndrome. Sometimes the trauma bond is also referred to as a Stockholm syndrome. Hyper charismaniacs may teach this as a soul tie, but we really don't have that. What we really have here is a separation from the truth. We have a truth battle going on here. But what many people refer to as trauma bonding or Stockholm syndrome is a genuine actual thing. It's what happens when you see someone whom you know, or maybe you've been in this situation where you are just involved with someone who is terrible for you. They act towards you as if they are your worst enemy. They are abusive. They are mentally abusive. They are verbally abusive. They are spiritually abusive. They diminish you. They make you small as they make themselves large. Well, and yet someone can't leave. Someone can't leave, and we're going to discuss why. It's a trauma bond. It's Stockholm syndrome. So I'll bring up some scriptures here in a minute, but I'm going to read you the definition of a trauma bond. Trauma bond or Stockholm syndrome is the psychological phenomenon that occurs when a person forms a strong emotional attachment to their abuser or someone in a harmful relationship. This bond often develops in situations where the victim experiences intermittent cycles of abuse, trauma, and intermittent cycles of affection and kindness by the abuser. Typified by the phrase, it's a love-hate relationship. And that's exactly what it's like to be stuck in this. The relationship often keeps the victim psychologically and emotionally tied to the abuser, making it difficult for them to leave or fully recognize the toxic nature of the relationship. It's almost reminiscent of the slot machine effect. In other words, you get a little bit of a payoff that keeps you putting coins in, ultimately ending up a loser. The key characteristics that will be involved in a trauma bonded relationship: intermittent reinforcement. The victim may experience periods of abuse followed by moments of high levels of affection or normalcy, which can create confusion, cognitive dissonance. There's two different realities, there's two different versions of truth. Okay. States of confusion and keep the individual emotionally invested. You keep investing you while they keep making withdrawals from you. There's a power imbalance often. There's often a significant power differential in the relationship. Somebody's a king and somebody's a servant or maid, with one person exerting control over the other, contributing to feelings of dependency. These relationships can exist in spiritual places of worship. These relationships can invest in workplaces. They can exist in a family dynamic. Oftentimes, the dynamic can train you or groom you for later considering these abusive relationships in the rest of your life normal. Number three, there's a fear loyalty dynamic in a trauma bonded relationship. Victims may feel fearful of leaving the relationship due to potential retaliation, threats, or feelings of guilt, anger, or betrayal, which can foster loyalty to the abuser. If this is a close, interpersonal, significant person of interest, a significant other, let me put it that way, a person can fear that the person who's abusing them will change in a later relationship and another person will get a better version of the person who's abusing them. They're holding out for dear life that this person who has not repented and does not change will change. In other words, they're living in a fantasy of reality. Cognitive dissonance, again, victims may struggle to reconcile the positive feelings they have for the abuser with the negative experiences and trauma and abuse, leading to a state of confusion and an internal conflict and sense of uncertainty. This uncertainty affects our decision making process. And five, there's a sense of shared trauma. We share good times, we share bad times, but the bad times outweigh the good times. Situations of extreme stress or trauma can enhance the bond, creating a false sense of intimacy or connection based on shared adversity. Maybe it's even stories of shared childhood adversity with the person, but the shared adversity that you have with that person created a good person in you, and it created an abuser in the person that you're empathizing with. These dynamics usually are entered into by people with kind, caring, and very empathetic hearts. Um, One of the things that trauma bonds can occur in a variety of relationships, including those involving intimate partners, family members, and even within religious organizations, professional or political context. Recognizing these bonds is a crucial step in healing and seeking support for individuals who find themselves in these situations. These relationships are also even marked with what is commonly referred to as a person with narcissistic personality disorder, and they follow and they begin building on what is called the devaluation cycle, or the cycle of abuse, which is love bomb, devalue, and discard. So, in order to begin the trauma bonding process, the person, it could be the employer, the pastor, prophet, apostle, it could be the significant person, the significant other. The first step is they inordinately love bomb you. They give you gifts of extreme gifts, extravagant gifts, gifts that overwhelm you, give you an overwhelming sense of good feeling. They have a good sense of who you are. They think you're capable of anything. They love bomb you with your apostolic gift and your anointing to be a prophet. That's how these religious organizations, they see an incredible future for you, as long as you stay within the good graces and favor of the leader. You have to stay in the good graces and favor of the leader. And then, as soon as there's a flaw in your performance, as soon as you disagree with the leader, as soon as you disagree, normal things of life come up, you are not love bombed anymore. You are not um, grandized anymore by the grandiose narcissist. You become the lowest form of life on earth. You go to a devaluation cycle. Okay, abuse, discard. Okay, they discard you. They treat people in this cycle. The victim is treated like an appliance. They're not treated like a human being. They're not treated like a person. They're depersonified. And in the idealization stage, the love bombing stage, they are over personified. They are glorified. They are grandized. Inordinate flowers and candy and gifts and words of affirmation just overwhelm you and flood you, and your hormone flattery. Okay, but then you fail to deliver on a promise that you didn't ever make, and then you're devalued and discarded, and then the cycle repeats over and over again. That's how these trauma bonded relationships form. One such relationship like that, and we're going to go through some biblical relationships like that, where people went from hero to villain in 2.5 seconds at the hands of their abuser. One such relationship is the relationship between David and Saul. We saw that relationship take place when David came on the scene to play the harp initially for Saul, but later on to slay Goliath. But after the slaying of Goliath, Saul turns jealous. Let me see where this is. This is 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 6. David went from rock star performance, slaying the giant, slaying Goliath, the enemy of God's people. And what happened to Saul? As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Look what happened here. Look at the abuser. We know very well from this story. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David tens of thousands, and to me they've ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. Saul had a jealous side eye at David from that day on. Let's go on here just a little bit further. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house. While David was playing the lyre, as he did play day by day, Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall, but David evaded him twice. The following day, after Saul's narcissistic injury took place, the wounding of his ego, even though he was in the position of power, even though he was in the position of kingship, he felt so threatened by David that he was ready to kill him the following day. And that's exactly what happens in trauma bonded relationships. You go from someone's greatest ally to their greatest enemy in 2.5 seconds or less. So not only did Saul attempt to kill him, he attempted to kill him twice in this one setting. But let's go on. Did David learn anything? That's 2 attempted killings right there. And there's a book called The 48 Laws of Power. And I don't know if it's the first law of power, but I know it's one of those laws of power. Never outshine the king. Now, this shouldn't be how it works in God's kingdom. We should be able to be the best that we can possibly be, and we shouldn't have to worry about damaging other people's egos when our light outshines them. But when you deal with an individual with jealousy, and remember, at this point, the spirit of the Lord has departed from Saul, and evil spirits he's given over to evil spirits, not because God's spirit departed from him. But let's go on and see what happens next. Okay, by 6 chapters later, 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 16, we're still playing the games with Saul. As soon as David had finished speaking, and David had said he had the opportunity to kill Saul, but he didn't do it. And Saul, as soon as David had finished speaking these words, Saul said, "Is that your voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day holy, or how you have dealt well with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands." He was in a vulnerable position, and David could have taken his life, but he did not. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me therefore by the Lord that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house. And David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went up to their stronghold. This is extremely powerful, but it ain't over. What led up to this verse, to chapter 24, were previous attempts before, even after the attempt to kill David with the javelin in chapter 19. Saul wants to kill David. And Saul said to Jonathan, his son, to all his servants, that they should kill David. He wants Jonathan and the servants to kill David. But Jonathan pleads for Saul's case. So even Jonathan finds himself trauma bonded to his ungodly father, who's still in the position, even though the Lord Spirit has left him. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, "Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself, and I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are. And I will speak to my father about you, and if I learn anything, I will tell you." And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said, "Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you." So this is, again, when the person stuck in the cycle is well-doing to the other, but the other has a malicious intention in their heart for their victim. For he took his life in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord worked a great salvation for all of Israel. You saw it, and you rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David? And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines and struck them with a great blow, so that they fled before him. Then a harmful spirit, look what happens here. A harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul, because the spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. And this is right after David had won another mighty battle in a faithful posture of submission to Saul. And David was playing the lyre, and Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded him, so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Look how Saul's outrage and evil persists. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, Saul's wife, told him, "If you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with clothes. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." Then Saul sent messengers to see David, saying, "Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him." And when the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed with the pillow of goat's hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me thus? And let my enemy go, so that he has escaped." And look what Michal does. She doesn't say, "Because he's my husband and he's done you no harm." Look what she says here. Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" In other words, she claimed that David had threatened to kill her if he didn't let her escape. Wow, there's such a lack of honesty when you're dealing with this abusive person. There's a lack of honesty in the overall environment. We also see this effect in condition to the nation of Israel in Exodus chapter 14. We see a liberated people who still don't know how to live in their freedom. Uh, Exodus 14:10 says right here, when Pharaoh, this is when he was pursuing the Israelites to get them back. When Pharaoh drew near to the people of Israel, the liberated people of Israel, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, look at these people. "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt?" You can just set someone free and they want to go back to captivity. "Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. We prefer to be slaves." It's hard to leave. When you've become dependent on your abuser, it's hard to leave. It's a principle. And this is why we should have compassion for those who have a hard time leaving toxic relationships, for it's normal. There's no situation, there's nothing strange, nothing new under the sun. "For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." They don't know that they're God's chosen people. They don't know how to live like God's chosen people yet. And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." I think other translations say, "Be still." But look at what the Lord immediately replies. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Why aren't you acting like you're free? Why aren't you living free? Why aren't you leading? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea as on dry ground." And they did. They did. We know this story well, saints. They went through on dry ground. But did they learn? Unfortunately, no. People are slow learners. Here we are. We're in Numbers chapter 14. What do we find those trauma bonded people who don't know how to live free in the Lord doing here? We find them rebelling. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt, to go back?" And there's a lot of things that the trauma bond always plays with people's history. It always plays with what people have compared to what they used to have. And they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader. Let us rebel against Moses and Aaron and dethrone God and go back to Egypt. Put us back into captivity." Yeah, because once you have been trauma bonded to your abuser, you don't know how to live like a free person anymore. You don't know how to live responsibly. And you see here, Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of um, Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, "The land which we passed through to spy out, it is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into the land and give it to us, and a land that flows with milk and honey. Something better is on the other side of this battle." But they wanted comfort in captivity and dependence more than they wanted the liberty of fighting the battles that God was going to take them through. It's tough. It's tough to break that trauma bond. It's tough to break away from your abuser. And Moses has to intercede for the people because God was ready to start over. But anyway, Moses intercedes, and God has mercy on his people. And he says, he appeals here in verse 17. I just want to show you this. In the midst of a trauma bonded people, a people who don't want to let go of the past or let go of their abuser, to cling firmly to Christ or to God. And now please let the power of the Lord be great as you have promised, saying, "The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Please, please pardon the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your steadfast love, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt until now." And he does. And he does. But let's go on. So it's when you're trauma bonded to the very person who's keeping you in captivity. You are held in captivity to dependence, comfort, and not God reliance, but reliance upon man. It's man reliance is what causes a trauma bond. Okay, here we go. And I also want to the finale of this, and I think this often plays into the human dynamic, is the story of David and Absalom. Absalom had killed one of his brothers because he had raped his sister. I think the sister's name was Tamar. So Absalom is essentially essentially cast away for a period of time. The relationship between and Absalom is complex, marked with deep affection and very serious and profound betrayal. While the term trauma bond isn't explicitly mentioned in the Bible, the dynamics of their relationship can be seen through various passages that illustrates David's emotional struggles and turmoil surrounding Absalom. In 2 Samuel 13:28 through 29, it describes the moment after Amnon, David's son, raped Absalom's sister Tamar. Absalom held a grudge against Amnon and conspired and killed him. 2 Samuel 14, 1 through 24, when Absalom was in exile after killing Amnon, David longed to see him. He missed him. Missed him even though he had sinned against him by killing his son. And he sinned because David failed to handle the situation in justice and righteousness. 2 Samuel 15, 1 through 6, Absalom began to conspire against David, winning the hearts of the people of Israel, showing David's vulnerability as a father. He was especially vulnerable to this rebellious son. 2 Samuel 18:33. After Absalom's death in battle, David's profound grief is evident. He's remembering who Absalom used to be. I would liken this to situations and circumstances. Ted Bundy's mother insisted, in spite of all evidence, in spite of everything that happened, that Ted Bundy had not taken the lives of over 30 people, I believe. She insisted on his innocence until the moment he finally confessed and said he had done it. She remembered her little boy, and she didn't realize she'd raised a monster. And that's what a lot of people do, the same thing. I've seen parents go to schools and defend the most wicked, unruly, dishonorable, and disrespectful children, talking about them. They're like they're mommy's little prince or princess, and refusing to discipline them and refusing to accept them, that they aren't mommy's little good boy or mommy's little good girl anymore. They're not your little baby anymore. They've turned out to be evil. And people have just quite frankly done that. And their parents have held on to the memory of who they used to be. That's what David did with Absalom. Let's go on. So again, this is not something that requires some kind of a special spiritual warfare or breaking a demonic force or casting out a demon. It requires the person who's the victim of this kind of bond to fight a serious truth battle and accept the reality of who somebody is. There's two ways that people really get duped in relationships. They really get duped in relationships by who somebody used to be, okay? Who somebody appeared to be. Who somebody appeared to be during that love bombing cycle, during that honeymoon phase. But when you find out that who they appeared to be is not who they really are, kick the dust off your feet and depart from them. You do not have to be in a relationship with someone who is taking your life, literally. So people get stuck on who somebody was or who somebody appeared to be. They also get stuck in a trauma bonded relationship from the idea of who somebody could be. Knowing what God could do also keeps people stuck in these trauma bonded, dysfunctional, abusive relationships. So let's look at after Absalom is killed. Absalom, the rebel child, is killed in battle. In chapter 19, verse 1, it was told to Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom, a truly rebellious child, not a child like Jonathan, Jonathan was given Saul good counsel. Don't harm David. He's loyal to you. He's a good man. But due to the evil which was in Saul's heart and the fact that the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul and an evil spirit was sent to Saul. See, when the Spirit of the Lord departs, you don't you out there waiting. That's why the Bible's prescription is not fighting demon. It's submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. It's in James, it talks about humble yourself before God that he might lift you up. It's humility. It's abasement. So this truly rebellious son of David is killed in battle, and the king is weeping and mourning over this son. David has not come to the fact that Absalom will never be who he wants him to be. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard that day that the king is grieving for his son, and the people stole into the city that day as people still in who are shamed when they flee in battle. It was like they lost because the king is grieving over his rebellious child. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be complicated. The king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, my son, my son, my son!" Then Joab came into the house to the king, and this is what good counsel who loved David said, and what I hope and pray you have friends that will say this to you and to me. You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who have this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters, and the lives of your wives and your concubines. This son could have killed all of David's sons and daughters. He could have, and he did. I think he took all of David's wives as his own wife. We're not going to get into that because that's a little juicy in the scriptures there, but he did it because you love those. Look at what it says here. Look at what Joab tells him. And this is what you, this is what living with this kind of relationship turns you in. This is what it turns you into when you're involved or enmeshed. They also call this enmeshment because you have loved those who hate you and hated those who love you. For you have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. That's it's harsh, but it's also liberating. It's also shocking enough to wake you up out of your ignorance, out of your delusion. He's in a delusion. Absalom is not who you think he is. He was never the son you wish you had. Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night, and this will be worse. This will be your worst mistake ever. For you, this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. David brought on a lot of trouble on his life. We all do. We all do. We all are our worst enemies. But in this case, David's enemy, being David, was that he loved those who hate him and was showing hatred for those who love him. Then the king arose and took his seat in the gate. And the people were told, behold, the king is sitting in the gate. This is what happened after an army would win battle. The king would present himself to the people, and the people would come to him. And all the people came before the king, and he showed his appreciation for their service and their fidelity, In other words, congratulating them for their victory, showing his appreciation for them, being in among them, not being exalted and above them. But in this case, because of this bond he had with Absalom, he could not let go of Absalom and who Absalom could have been, because he wasn't holding on to who Absalom was. He was holding on to who he had wished he would be or who he could have been. Now, that's not reality. And that's what we're fighting with. And that's what people are struggling with, who are struggling leaving these relationships where everybody who's not personally involved can see you dealing with the devil, can see that you're in a situation with a person doing you wrong, doing you dirty. And look, these are not qualities. These are not qualities to despise in a person. These weren't the qualities that made him not a man of God. David, of all the people whom God could have said was a man after his own heart, he said that of David. David's fierce loyalty, his fierce belief in what God could do in a person, his fierce belief that God could change anyone, was not a quality that we are not to admire, but perhaps these failures of David are what we can learn from, the ways that we can glean, the way these personality dynamics work in the scripture, they work in our lives today. And maybe someone who's in the midst of a relationship and a whole crowd of people says, why don't he or she leave her alone? Why doesn't he or she leave that place or leave those people, leave that workplace, leave that toxic cult-like religious institution, leave Daystar, Well, maybe if we reviewed the scriptures with a little understanding of relational dynamics, we would understand. David was blinded by his own fierce desire for Absalom to be somebody he wasn't. He was also blinded by that same desire that Saul would receive him, that Saul would appreciate and recognize his loyalty, recognize he could be trusted. And so David, although he was a man after God's own heart, gives us a stark example of the humanity that still exists within each and every one of us. And maybe if you've ever been in this situation, we can give grace and mercy to those who have not been set free yet. and understanding and compassion and prayers. And if necessary, to rebuke, contradict, and exhort, just like Joab did to David. In God's time, people will be set free. But there's a healing process. You know, I think it's Matthew 6:33, is it? Jesus said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you." So it's really a matter of putting king and kingdom first. Everything for our first love, making Christ our first love in everything. Jesus said, "Anyone who loves father, mother, brother, sister, son, or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." And that's what it really is. It's a displaced, disproportionate amount of loyalty in the wrong place to the wrong person. All right. I hope this blesses you. I hope this inspires you. I hope this encourages you. And I hope and pray that maybe we can search the scriptures and get a little bit of these relational dynamics. And look, it's not a soul tie. It's not a ritual necessary to cast out a demon. It's a person who is in need of a serious wake-up call and a serious intervention of truth in their life. I've been there. I've been there. I've been with folks that I should have done left. And I had to, it took the Lord's timing and people in prayer and some people who verbally intervened to get me to leave, to get me to go. And God can do it. God can do it. He will do it in his time and in his way. And he calls us to be facilitators of helping to set captives free. This is really stronghold warfare. 2 Corinthians 10:3, for the weapons of our warfare not of this world, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. We take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. So God help us to recognize the inordinate and insubordinate thoughts, attitudes, emotional attachments we have to the wrong people, and help us to strengthen our mental, emotional, and spiritual dependency on Christ and Christ alone. In his name, grace, peace, and love. In Jesus' name, amen.